Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, how to modernize your sign-on application with LANSA. Thank you for taking time in your busy schedule to join us today. My name is Jose Caso. I am the LANSA Product Marketing Manager. Please feel free to do questions in the Q&A option in the bottom of your screen. We will have a brief moment to answer your questions after the webinar has finished. Today we have Eugene King, LANSA Senior Sales Engineer, and Madam Kumar, SrinSoft Senior Business Development Manager. Okay, without any further introduction, over to you, Eugene.
Thank you, Jose. Right, so today's webinar, first of all, has been brought to you by SrinSoft, who has over 16 years of experience in digital and IT consulting and have over 450 associates worldwide. And LANSA, an IDEA company who have over 30 years of experience in application development and is used by over 8,000 customers in over 65 countries around the world. So now that I've got that out of the way, let's start looking at the motivators for change with regards to moving from Synon to LANSA. So one of the key motivators is the need to modernize existing systems. 5250 screens are becoming a liability, especially as web interfaces are becoming the norm. Also, technology is improving, and the need to take advantage of this requires a flexible solution. Growing sign-on models are becoming more of an impediment rather than a facilitator to the implementation of change. And this is further compounded by the lack or difficulty of integration with third-party products that you have with sign-on systems. Of course, there are also concerns over the future of sign-on, especially with the recent purchase by Broadcom. And finally, the ever-present concern over the future of the IBM I. Now, to tell you the truth, this concern has been around since I started developing back in 1996, and it always seems to be there in the background, but nothing's really happened. IBM is still going as strong as ever. So they're the motivators for the change. So what options are actually available for moving forward? Well, the first thing, it can do nothing. Your systems may still meet your requirements. The current tool, Synon, may still be fit for purpose. So why would you change? You could also migrate to an off-the-shelf package, but will you need to change your business process to fit the new system, or can it be adapted to meet your requirements? If so, who does this, and how much will it cost? Now, if further enhancements are required, who will make those changes? Another option is you can migrate to another development tool. Now, there are a large section available on the market. You have your traditional IBM and Microsoft development tools, as well as the latest and greatest low-code development tools. But can your staff handle the new concepts while still maintaining their productivity? And then you have LANSA. But like the other tools, will LANSA deliver what you need? Can developers deliver the benefits of modern software with a minimal loss of productivity? So hopefully during this webinar, I'll actually show you that that will be the case. Now let's start with a comparison. So Synon and LANSA have a similar heritage. Both were developed to allow IBM developers to be more productive. Synon itself had evolved as a case tool, so that was the top-down approach, while LANSA took the other way. You know, we evolved as using OO principles from the bottom-up approach. And one of LANSA's key principles is to define once and use many, whether that is a simple field definition that's used in multiple tables or files, or a complex program or series of programs. If it's used more than once, it's placed in the repository as a reusable object. Now, both Synon and LANSA use an information engineering modeling approach, but where Synon is actually restricted to this approach, LANSA is not. And it's because of this that LANSA is more flexible. it generates loosely coupled executable objects. And in both cases, rules are maintained in one central location. So sign-on constraints and are stored inside the data model, while LANSA stores theirs in a centralized repository. And it's this flexible approach that's given LANSA the capability to adapt to underlying changes in the actual technology. Now, Synon also generates components in such a way that maintenance is difficult without regenerating the entire application. But because of LANSA's OO approach and this central repository, generating and deploying single changed objects is very easy. We don't have to resynchronize the entire data model. We just recompile the object that we've made the change, and we can deploy that single change. So we don't have to regenerate everything from scratch. And there are some major differences. This is really what makes LANSA such a much more flexible approach. LANSA itself keeps pace with changes in technology and development approaches because it doesn't just prescribe the development process that you use. And because its tool actually uses internally defined objects. Now, maintenance of your LANSA application is quicker because it leverages the benefits also of its hybrid low-code language. And we'll hear more about that a little bit later. So combine this hybrid low-code language with this active central repository, and you get a very powerful development environment. So to be able to move from one to the other technology, there are a number of different transition options that you have. The first, well, this really isn't a transition option. It's more about extending your existing functionality by developing around your core systems. Yeah, so any new function, you take your core systems, you leave them as they are, and then you just evolve the systems that you need to. You just add functionality as you need to take advantage of latest technology or to add some new business process. The next two are similar in nature. The first is the stage migration. The second is modular. Now, both of these are similar, but are slightly different, have a slightly different approach. Now, these are evolutionary approaches as you would redevelop your system at your own pace. The final is a revolutionary or a big bang approach where you redevelop the whole system in one go. And there are pros and cons to all of these approaches. Now, I myself have experience with the stage migration and the modular migration as we've moved some of the customers in the UK away from sign-on systems and really move them into the LANSA environment. And I'll show you when we get on to the demonstration how we've managed to actually do that while still maintaining the value of the current systems. So if we take a closer look, let's at the migration options, because that's where I really want to focus for this particular webinar. We'll start with the stage migration. Now, this is where we have new functionality that is created over an existing database. This option also involves replacing key programs that are no longer fit for purpose with Visual LANSA programs. Then, over the time, the remaining programs, the remaining sign-on programs, are replaced with LANSA programs, but the original database is kept. Now, this approach allows you to take advantage of the latest technologies and to get your solution to the market quickly. However, as you are using your existing database, it supports only a limited application redesign. And this is where we then go on to the modular migration. Now, here we select specific areas of the business functionality and completely redevelop it. New programs, new database. These will exist alongside the old programs and the old database. Now, this is intended for those who want to fully redevelop their system, including the database, but want to deliver it gradually over time. This approach will require additional work to retain the integration between the two systems. And we're working one at the moment in the UK where we are doing that. We're actually keeping the old sign-on systems running in the background, and we've got the new systems that are actually running in the cloud, and we integrate the two. So we're able to update the new database and at the same time synchronize the old database. So we have that until we can break the link. We have that synchronization. So it is a little bit of extra work that is actually required when you do that sort of migration process. The final option, well, this is the big bang approach, where the entire system is redeveloped. Now, this is especially suited if your system is no longer fit for purpose. It allows you to design your system from the ground up and to take full advantage of OO design, so the object-oriented design, the tiered architectures, and the graphical user interfaces. But this is a larger project, and of course then would entail the greater risks. So for the next part of the webinar, I want to focus on how LANSA can help you with the staged and modular migration options. So Visual LANSA is able to take your sign-on or RPG, doesn't have to, it could be a combination of both. A lot of the organizations that we work with have got a combination of sign-on and RPG systems. Well, we can take both, even COBOL, if you've got old COBOL programs as well. And we can take those screens and we can fit them into a modern web, or if you still want to do a Windows application, we can do Windows applications as well, without changing your underlying code. So we're not using Open API, we're not doing anything like that. We just take the 5250 data stream for those applications, and we can reuse those in a completely different way. You can add new functionality as required using our Visual LANSA development tool. What this does, it allows you to modernize your systems at your own pace, regardless of which of these transition options you select. Now, what I'm going to show you is the steps necessary to reuse your sign-on or RPG screen. So here's an example screen. And what I'm going to do in the course of the demo, I'm actually going to build this application for you live, so you can see how I can take that 5250 screen, which is what you see in the center of the screen here. That is actually a 5250 screen which has been refaced. So let me just take you through what's required for that. So to understand how Visual LANSA can help you do that, we need to understand the role played by each of the key parts to LANSA's modernization toolset. And we'll start this by looking at axes. This is LANSA's refacing tool. As an aside, it can also be used as a standalone product. So you can go off, install it on your IBM I, and you can start accessing your 5250 programs over the web. It is that simple. But I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to show you how we can leverage these screens in a completely different way using Visual LANSA. Visual LANSA is LANSA's hybrid low-code development platform, and we'll look at that in more detail later on. Now, Visual LANSA contains an application accelerator. We call this Visual LANSA Frameworks. I'm going to refer to it as the VLF. So if you hear me say VLF, I'm talking about our application accelerator. And we'll see this, we'll see an example of this later on when I get to the live demonstration. Now, the frameworks is exactly as it says on the box. It's a framework onto which developers can build their application. The final component is RAMP. RAMP allows you to plug in your Axes Reface Screens into the Visual LANSA frameworks. For the demonstration later, I'll be focusing how this is done with Visual LANSA. But let's take a little bit more detailed look at each one of these elements, starting with Axes. With Axes, we can take an IBM I application and very quickly web enable it. Now, this is done on the fly. We don't need access to any DDS. You don't need to change your RPG or your sign-on programs in the background. All you need is the 5250 data stream. This is an example of what a screen looks like out of the box when Axes is initially installed. Nothing has been done to this screen. We've added a couple of global rules to allow you to have drop downs and to change the style, but nothing else. Along with Axes, we have a web-based development tool, and we can customize that screen and add value. And this is what you're seeing here. So I've added a chart. I've also added a data table, and we'll see this in action in the demonstration shortly. So you can add maps, and you can even merge data from other screens onto a single screen. Now, in view of the time which we've got available, I'm not going to really look at Axes. We can always organize another session, or if you're interested in Axes, you can contact our sales team, and we can help you, and we can arrange a one-on-one demo. But really, what I want to do is focus on repurposing those 5250 screens within inside Visual LANSA. Now, when we look at other refacing tools, normally that's as far as you'd be able to go. You could enhance the screens, you can web enable it, you can add some functionality around it, but you can't change the core behavior. With LANSA, this is the first step in that modernization strategy. Yeah, we can take this further. And the way we do that is by using Visual LANSA. So just a little bit about Visual LANSA. Now, you heard me talk about low code. So I just want a hybrid low code in specific. And I just want to get some clarification on what we mean by the low code side of things. So low code in its simplest definition is an application development method focusing on visual elements, which include drag and drop, wizards, and templates, and all this instead of handwriting code. Now, on the no code side, that is solely on visual development, while on the low code it does offer the ability to extend apps by handwriting code in other languages, and that is normally outside the low code IDE. Now, hybrid low code, on the other hand, combines aspects of visual development found in low code and combines it with hand coding found in your traditional development. And all of this is combined into a single IDE. You get the speed and efficiency of low code with the control and power of traditional coding techniques. Now, in the case of Visual LANSA, LANSA's hybrid low code platform, the language is called RDMLX, which stands for Rapid Development and Maintenance Language. Now, RDMLX is a very powerful high-level language with near limitless capabilities. In fact, I've been programming in RDML since 1997 when I joined LANSA, and all that's changed, the syntax has remained the same for all through that period, but what's changed is the power underneath, what we're able to do with it, what we're able to generate. And this is where we have the advantage over Synon. We were able very quickly to make the leap to generate Windows applications and web applications because of this enterprise architecture out of the box that we have. The way that we created our central repository, where we have these objects that we reuse over and over again. We also have a business rules engine, similar to the constraints that you would find within inside your sign-on and your validation rules that you find within inside your data model. We also define them within inside our repository in a similar way. And this is where we have the similarities with Synon. Synon developers get to grips with LANSA very quickly because they're familiar with these sort of abstracted development techniques. Likewise, with our high-level business language, or RDMLX, Synon developers use action diagrams. We use RDMLX. But this RDML language is a high-level language, and what we generate underneath is dependent on where we want to deploy it. So if I want to deploy it to web, it'll generate my HTML, my JavaScript, and my CSS. If I'm deploying it on the server side, it'll be C, C++. If I want to create a green on black application, I can do. It'll generate RPG ILE for me. But at no time will I ever have to go down to that low code level, to that lower coding level. Everything that I've done ever since 1997 has been at the high level. I've never had to drill down. Your debugging is done at the RDML level. You don't have to go down to the RPG to do that bugging, which you do within inside the Synon environment. And the power of the language to be able to do a full stack development with a single language. So when it comes to the website, I can develop the client, I can develop the server, and I can glue the things in the middle, all using the single language. And a further benefit is of that abstraction is the ability to deploy it to any platform of my choice. So whether it's Windows, whether it's cloud, whether it's IBM I, whether it's Linux, it's your choice where you want to deploy it. And that centralized repository, because we take all the validation rules and triggers and stored procedures and stick them in the repository, we could swap out the databases. So you might be using DB2400. You might want to swap to SQL Server, or you may want to access an SQL Server at the same time. You can do. You can create composite applications. You can create very powerful applications by using our development language. So that is just briefly Visual LANSA. And as I mentioned, inside Visual LANSA, we have this Visual LANSA frameworks. Now, as I mentioned, this is a key part of LANSA's low code and IBM I modernization development approach. And it's used to design, implement, deploy web, Windows desktop, and mobile applications. It allows developers to hit the ground running when developing back office style applications. And we'll see this in action in a second. As I mentioned, we've also got another part of this puzzle as well, which is called RAMP. RAMP stands for Rapid Application Modernization Process. It is a re-engineering tool that lets you rapidly consolidate your IBM I applications into the VLF, allowing you to run existing IBM I applications alongside new development. You can then incrementally replace your Synon, RPG, or COBOL programs with new components without serious impact to your business operations. Now let's see how this works in the background. We'll do that by first looking at a sample IBM I application. Here we go. We've got a sign in. We'll navigate through a menu system of some sort. We may then have a subfile. We may have to select a record from that subfile to display the details. Now, the screens that we use to navigate around the application are called junctions, because we're really not concerned with those. The screen where we do work, where we look at data and we maintain data, these are called destinations. Now, this is the screen. These are the screens that we are interested in and which will be plugged in to the VLF. The RAMP tool will actually handle the navigation to the destination screens behind the scenes. So as an end user, you'll no longer need to see these junctions. You'll only see the destinations. And this is what it'll look like. So we have the basic 5250 screen, which has been plugged in under the details. And we have brand new functionality, which is this list, this search and list resulting list, which is Visual LANSA web pages, sitting alongside the 5250 screens. Behind that is still a 5250 screen. I've made no changes to that program at all. And now what I'm going to do is go on to the demonstration. So for this demonstration, I'm going to start by showing you a completed application, showing you the sorts of functionality that you can do in repurposing your 5250 screens, your Synon, RPG, or COBOL. And then I'll go down and I'll actually start building one for you. And we start by prototyping. We'll prototype the application. Then we'll add functionality using Visual LANSA's wizards to create some basic functionality. And then we'll add in our 5250 Reface Screens using the RAMP tools. So let's start by looking at a sample application. So I'm going to sign on. So it's for this demonstration, it's based on a fictional company called the LANSA Tool Company. So this is a company that sells tools online, but specifically we're looking at back office functionality. So we're looking at how we're maintaining the systems, how we're looking at orders, doing invoices and credit notes. So I need to sign in. So I'm just going to select it from my drop downs there and sign in. So again, this is Visual LANSA. So this is Visual LANSA VLF, Visual LANSA Frameworks. This is a simple web page that I've created using one of our wizards to plug in a dashboard. So this is brand new functionality developed using Visual LANSA. What we can do is that we can also plug in standard Axes sessions. So let me just show you two examples of Reface Screens. So this isn't RAMP. All I've done here is I've opened up two iframes, two web pages within inside the frameworks. Notice I don't have to sign on. The framework is actually handling the logging in for me. And what we see are two examples of Axes screens. Now you'll be saying, but that's green on black. Yes, because one of our customers in the UK, just before COVID-19 lockdown, or just after COVID-19 lockdown hit, wanted to roll out Axes to all of their customer services. But rather than install terminal emulators on everybody's device, they wanted them to be able to access it using the web. And one of the styles they wanted was to make it look green on black. So we have applied a style that then made it look like a green on black, but it is still web. I can still click things. We have our function keys down at the bottom that have been click enabled as well. Now on the right-hand side, we have the exact same screens. But in this case, I've used the development tool, the Axes development tool, to change the way that it looks to be a contact card style interface. So as I go through these exact same screens that you saw previously, and these are the same menus. So with Axes, you can actually really modernize your system. You can really have a modern looking web application just by using Axes on its own. I can go into the customers, I can go into customers here. And again, you'll see the various changes that I've actually done to this. We can go into details, and there's my details screen. And this is an example of where I've added some functionality with the Axes developer. This is the exact same thing, except I have to use the keys to go in, and it actually displays the screen accordingly. But it's the exact same screen, I just have a different reface. So that's how we can embed Axes within inside the frameworks. This will give me access to a 5250 session without having to start my terminal emulator. What I really want to show you is how RAMP actually works. And for that, I'm going to go into my sales order processing, go to customers, then do a selection. So this is now, again, new functionality. I've created this using the wizard and gone in and then modified it using our development environment. Okay, and I'll show you how that's done with regards to creating it using a wizard. I've done a quick search. It's come back with the results. Now, as soon as I select an entry from that list, RAMP takes over. RAMP in the background is now logging on to the IBMI, navigating through the 5250 menu options, going to the subfile and displaying the resulting selection. So now, as I navigate around this, I just have to select it from the actual list. Likewise, with address, so instead of having to keep going back to the subfile, I just select the tab at the top of the screen. So now the interface becomes more intuitive. In fact, I could have different parts of the system available here on this one particular view. What it could be on one part of the system that you would normally have to start another terminal session for, but I can have them all up and running in one web page here and working seamlessly together. Okay. I can add new functionality. So in this case, I've added notes for this particular customer. You can add attachments. And so I can add documents, and these can be stored as blobs in the database, or they can be stored as documents in the IFS. It's really your choice, or even on a separate file server. It's really your choice where they're actually stored. But now what we've got is all this new functionality sitting alongside the old 5250 screens. Okay. Now you'll notice I've got one special one here that says details wrapper. What is that? Well, that is a specialized LANSA web page. Okay, so this is a page written in LANSA. But what it does, in this case, the top half of the information comes directly from the 5250 screen. That's why we call it a wrapper. I'm actually wrapping the 5250 screen. So if I press this little eye icon, because I'm in as developer mode, I have access to these functionalities, which allows me to do any debugging or tracing necessary to find any issues. But I can show you the 5250 screen, which is hidden behind, which is the same as the details. But what I'm doing here is I'm wrapping it in a web page and then adding additional functionality at the bottom. And this is what you see here. This is my order history, but now what we've got is order history and order details, whereas previously we only had order history on the axis screen. So I've now enhanced the functionality. I've merged the data with new and old. So this is the old data and this is the new data. Now, advantages of using the framework, the VLF for this, is that I could actually quite easily jump back to my session 1. And it's remembered exactly where I was. So now I've got a web application which is looking and behaving exactly like a Windows application. I can take automatic tiling off and I can move those windows around. I can download the data to Excel. So anything that's in there is automatically downloaded, and that's a freebie that's built into the list. So the next question is, how do you go about doing this? How do you build these sorts of applications? And that's what I'm going to show you now. So I'll do that by first going into our development environment, our IDE, integrated development environment. And this is where, as a developer, I will spend all of my time. This is our centralized repository. All of my objects are defined here. My tables, files are defined here and are maintained within inside this environment. I never have to leave this environment. Now, I could spend the next 30 minutes talking about the environment, but I really want to focus on the VLF and you reusing your 5250 screens. So I'm going to fire up my VLF workbench. I'm going to open up an empty framework. Okay, so this is a completely empty framework. I've got nothing in there and I'll show you it. I will execute it so you can see what it looks like. We have the little introduction. You know, you can decide. I did mention that you can either use a VLF1, which is our web, or VLF Windows. It's the same design. It uses XML in the background, but again, you don't need to worry about it. It's all handled as part of this. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to execute it quickly. I'm going to execute it in, let's say in Firefox. I'm going to do it as a developer. I'm going to use material design and execute. So I'm going to execute that now just to show you that it's an empty framework. So it's still asking me to sign on. So I've got the basic authentication set up for that. And then we just go in, LANSA tool company. So there's nothing really in there. We have some administration functionality, but nothing else. So now let's start building our application. So I'm going to close that down. Close the tab. Leave the page. There we go. Now to start, I'm going to go to my tools option here, and I mentioned prototyping. Well, we have this instant prototyping assistant. And I like using this. So when I'm sitting down with customers or prospects, I'll sit down and I will actually talk through how they view their business. Now, it's important when you're doing this redesign to think about how you want the application to behave, not how it behaves now. Okay, so this is what this prototyping is doing. We will build a prototype and then we will fit the screens into the prototype. Regardless if they normally go together in your system, it doesn't really matter. Yep, think about how you want the application to behave in the future, not how it behaves now. And we start that by first defining the business objects. What are our business objects? These aren't necessarily your files that you have. In fact, probably with a sign-on background, think of it more as your entities. So what entities do you have? Now for this demo, I'm going to be using a customer. We'll also have orders and we'll have products. I can change the colors of these. I'm going to make that one a little bit darker, just like that. Okay. So now we've defined our objects. We then go to the next stage. Now we want to do the actions associated with those objects. These will become the tabs at the top of the screen. Now, if you remember, we had details, we have web information, we had address, and we add order history. Just like that. So I'll just define them exactly the same. I can just drag and drop these on like that, or I can take multiple ones and drag and drop those on as well. And I'll put order history on products there. So now I've created the command tabs, the tabs for each of these business objects. I then go next. It's now asking me, where do I want to put this? So this is what we call an application area. Okay, and this is actually going to be called sales order processing. And this is how we start building the menu that you will see on the left-hand side. So once I've done that, I can just take those objects, 3 objects, and drop them on to sales order processing and go next. It'll give me a summary of what I'm going to be creating. I just go finish. And it will then generate my prototype. So it'll close it down and reopen it back up to include the changes that I've just made. Now at this point, I could actually share the URL for this with other users so they could actually validate my prototype. But I'm going to do a couple more things first. So here's my applications. There's the sales order processing that we've just created. Now, I'm going to add a couple of icons to this just to make it look a little bit better. So first of all, let's go on to the BLF1 images, and we'll have one for sales. Like that. I'll just select the first one there. Like that. I'm going to go on business objects. I'm going to go to customers. Okay. Again, I'm going to select an image for that so that we can see that when we actually run the application. And I'll just select the first one that we've got there like that. Okay. Now, along with the business object, on the tab here, we've got something called RADPAD, Rapid Application Development Pad. And what we essentially have here is we can create a working specification document. I can include text, I can include notes, and these can be read by the developer. I can include images. So I have a couple of images here. And one of those images you could have created using a whiteboard, for example. So here's a quick whiteboard mock-up of what I want the filter, the search, to look like. And what do I want to do the search by? I want to search by customer ID, customer name, want to be able to search, download to Excel, so on and so forth. So details of what I want to be able to do within the filter and also what's going to be displayed in the list. I can go in and I can clear this down and I can do a prototype of the actual screen itself, which is going to be plugged in. Give myself a little bit of space, drag and drop that on there like that, and we'll leave that as it is like that. So once I've added those enhancements, once I've added my notes, I can do a quick save. And now I'm going to execute it again. Okay, so execute that again, sign in. Select this, you'll notice sales order processing, customer. That's fine, I'm just ignoring that message for now. Automatic tiling, and there's my prototype. So you can see my prototype is now there. If I then do a emulator search and do a select, we'll see my prototype. So now I can share this URL with other users and I can get them to have a look at the application and say, yes, I like that. We can proceed with that. So the next stage is to actually plug in new functionality. So we're going to plug in some new web pages here. designed and developed in our workbench using various wizards. I'm going to go back to my workbench, keeping the business object selected, go into common activities. Now here's a group of wizards that allow me to flesh out the functionality for that business object. And we start by selecting the columns to be displayed in the field. Now I just give it a file name like that. And we're using the customer master file for the LTC cust. And then it gives us all the fields that are contained in that file. So now I need to specify what fields are going to be displayed in the list. Well, I'm going to have the customer name. I will have the email address. I will have, let's have a look. We'll have the current balance and the discount code. And we'll also have the customer phone number. Okay. So after I decided what's going to be in the list, I have another option. Because this is actually a responsive design application, this means that it adjusts the display depending on the real estate which is available, then I can decide on what information to display depending on the size of the actual screen. So I'm going to have the customer name and email on all of them, and I'm just going to take off the discount code, that, and I'll leave the phone number on there as well on a small screen. Okay, and I'm finished. Now I need to identify, what do I use to uniquely identify a customer? And that is the LTC cust ID. And I just drag and drop that down there. So that's the key to my customer file. I'm done. That's all I need to do. Now I'll be using this a little bit later when we start looking at repurposing the 5250 screens. So I'm just going to go finish. Now I could just have a default list, or I could decide, well, actually, I'm going to display it as a contact card style. So I'm not going to include a photograph for this demo, but I've got an option to create only. So this will just create the filter, the search, and in this case, it'll create the components for the contact card, or I can open it up in the editor and I can make amendments to it. But I'm just going to do create only for this. Now this will go off. It'll generate the LANSA web page and compile it into JavaScript, CSS, and the necessary HTML for that component. Once that's done, we move on to the next stage. The next stage is, how are we going to do the search? How do we want to do the search? So we move down to this next section. Now I'm going to use the SQL search over a table. I'm going to select that one. And of course, it recognizes what the table is that I'm using. So I'm going to be using this customer ID and the customer name. And if I go to the comparison and do a right click, I can say, well, actually, it's going to begins with, and the customer name I want to do a contains. That's it, finish. I'm then going to create it. Again, I've got the same option, create only, or create and open up in the editor. I'm just going to create it for this demo. That'll go off. And now it'll generate not only the client side, but also the server side. So on the server running on the IBM I, it'll generate C and C++. On the Windows, on the web side, it'll generate the HTML, the JavaScript, and the CSS in the form of web pages and views and dialogues inside our repository. So once that's done, we then move on to the next. So I'm not going to add much else, but what I can do is that we add some custom functionality. So things that people would normally use as part of these sorts of applications. For example, attachments. So that attachment functionality that you saw me use, I'm going to add that to this frameworks. I can add notes. And we can add the notes to the frameworks as well. And I'm going to create that and just create only. So again, that'll go off, create all the necessary code for the front end and the back end and the glue in the middle. Okay. So once that's generated, I just want to do a couple more tweaks on this one. So I'm going to go to this option here called commands displayed. Commands allowed. Select the wrong one there. So in the commands allowed, I just want to sequence the tabs. that you see at the top of the page. So details is going to be 1. We'll have web information as 2. We'll have address as 3. We'll have order history as 4. And then attachments we'll have as 5. And what's the other one? It's notes. Notes we'll have as 6. Okay, that's it. I'm going to save that. Okay, once that's saved, I'm now going to execute. So now, same framework. I've plugged in my new pieces of functionality. So this has been developed using the wizards. So this is LANSA web pages. Select my option from the top. Sales order processing, do my customers. Okay, just close that one for now. Automatic tiling on. Do a search, and now you see that I've actually got the information. Okay, so now we're retrieving the information. I'm just doing a select from there. When I do the select, we see the various tabs that we've got, including the new functionality for the attachments and notes. Okay, so we've added that new functionality for this. Now the next stage is to plug in the 5250 screens here. Okay, so how do we go about doing that? And to do that, we go back to our workbench. And this time we open up the ramp tools. It'll ask me to sign on. To my session. And now what you'll see is axes. When I select this, start a 5250 identification and classification session, you'll see axes opened up in the bottom half of the actual screen. We'll go through each of these elements in a second once we've got this opened up. So once axes is started, we'll have a login screen. In the left-hand side here, we have our defined junctions and destinations and any specials that we may have. Specials are screens which may or may not occur as part of the navigation around the system. Normally, they're just screens which we tend to ignore for the best part. Now, here's an Axes development session that is opened up inside the Visual LANSA Framework's ramp tools. I'm not interested in this section, so I'm just going to give myself a little bit more real estate. Now, before I start, I want to auto update navigation scripts because I want the ramp tools to record the steps necessary to get to my destination. So once that's turned on, I go next. And the first screen I'm presented with, you'll notice it's in red. And that's because it doesn't know what that is yet. This is a menu. It is a junction. We select it as such. We navigate to the next menu. Again, it's a junction. We don't do work on that screen. LANSA Tool Company. Junction. Work with customers. Again, this is junction. Now I have a shortcut stuck up here that allows me to just enter a customer name and enter the subfile option at the top there. If I just press that, it'll go straight to the next screen. And that is the customer details. Now, this is the screen where I'm going to be doing work. This is my no, not a special. It's a destination. So let me just delete that. Slip of the mouse there. Right, let's delete that one. Say okay to that. Go back to this one. And we'll specify it as a destination. And it now goes green. I press enter to leave the screen. And it's important at this point that I complete the whole cycle. So I go straight to log off. And then I sign off. And now I've done a complete cycle. So now RAMP knows to log in, go to the menus, LTC maintenance, work with customer to show the customer details. But I need to do a quick change because when I went with work with customer, I actually typed in a value, but I want that value to be retrieved from the instance list, the results list that you saw previously. So to do that, I come across here to the work with and select this script section. And this is the script which has actually been generated. So this is how it navigates around. So I'm going to go to the customer detail screen. So this is where it determines where it's going. So do you want to go to the maintenance screen? Press F12. Do you want to go to the customer detail screen? Well, enter new customer name LANSA. So this is the hard-coded value. So if I was to run this as it is now, then I would always display LANSA. But I want it to pick up the value from the current instant list. This is where the unique identifier, the key of that table comes in handy, because now that is alpha key 1. So now when I save this, it will actually pick it up from the results list rather than being hard-coded value. Okay, one more thing to do. At the moment, it doesn't know where this destination is plugged into. So I need to specify where it's being plugged in. So in this case, this is the customer details. I'm going to select the customer details tab. Object customer tab is details. Now, I don't want the user to be able to just navigate around the screens willy-nilly. I want to be able to control what they do. So I can turn off the function keys. I can turn off the buttons as well. So that's what I'm actually doing there. I'm turning off the key and I'm also turning off the button for that key. So I have full control. So when they're on that screen, they can't do anything. Okay. The only thing that will happen is it'll be save it and then go on to the stay on that exact same screen. That's it now. I'm going to then save that. I'm now going to execute VLF1. And this time we'll do it in a Chrome and execute it. Do a sign in. Select sales order processing. There's my customer. Say okay to that. Automatic tiling. Now, normally, when you have these web sessions, it would actually remember your current setting. But because I'm going in as a developer, and you'll see that on the URL here, because I'm going in as a developer, it doesn't remember the settings. And this is so I can do the various types of testings that I need to actually do. So then I'm going to go in here and I'll do the same search, LA. I'm going to select LANSA. And now what should happen, if I've got it all correct, don't forget this is a live demo. If I've done all the steps correctly, we will see the refaced screen on the details tab. Navigate to it, and there we go. And we would then repeat that process for all the other tabs as well. Now, you could have done it all in one go, but it's a little bit more confusing. You need to know what you're doing when you do those sort of mappings. But as you get more and more familiar with the mapping and the mapping of these screens to these command handlers, then it becomes a lot easier to do. So just to summarize what you've actually seen, I've shown you that we can take those 5250 screens. With Axes, you can reface those screens very quickly and even enhance those screens. But the real value comes in when you can take those reface screens and plug them in to a brand new application and use them in a completely different way. Added benefit, the navigation around the system becomes a lot simpler. So training new users on these old sign-on systems, on these old RPG systems, becomes very easy indeed. We can take it further. We can wrapper those 5250 screens or completely replace them with brand new functionality without changing the overall flow of the application. One morning, they'll come in and they'll have the details. The next, they could see this screen instead. So just to conclude, really, LANSA is just one language all the time. Debugging is done, coding is done, all at that single level. We have multiple user interfaces, whether you want to do Windows, whether you want to do web, whether you want to do mobile applications. If you still want to develop green on black applications, procedural applications, we can still allow you to do that as well. You know, you can still develop those. Because of the architecture that we have, we're able to deploy to multiple different platforms. So whether that's the IBM I, whether it's Windows, Linux, whether you want to run it in the cloud, whether that's AWS, Azure, or even a private cloud, the database that you connect to, you know, we could be running against a DB2400 and an SQL server database. Yeah, it's irrelevant. As a LANSA developer, like with your sign-on side, when you're dealing with entities, a table to a LANSA developer is a table, regardless of what database that's actually connected to. Yep. So I use the same table that I've got defined on the IBM I. I use it on my local machine in SQL Express to do my development. I then check everything into the IBM I and run it directly on the IBM I. It's really transparent. I don't have to do much. It doesn't require much effort on my side. And really, just to drive home that we've got over 30 years. We actually started back in 1987, and we were developed by RPG developers as a way of speeding up development on the IBM I. But because of the way that we architected the product at that time, we've actually been able to adapt ourselves to adapt to technology waves. As those technologies change, we incorporate them into our architecture. So as a LANSA developer, I just know that single language. All it's changed since 1997, when I first started, was the power of that language. What I'm able to do is become more and more powerful. We also have a very competitive track record, especially around backwards compatibility. We still have customers running systems that were developed back in 1987, but running them on a modern system in a modern on a modern architecture. Okay, so that concludes the webinar and demonstration. So what I'll do now is hand back to Jose to see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Eugene. Well, first of all, please feel free to do any questions in the Q&A option in the bottom of your screen. We actually have one question right now, and it's, why is this a good time to migrate from Synon to LANSA?
It's always a good time to migrate from Synon to LANSA in my book, but it really comes down to your confidence in the future of Synon. So I know that Synon has changed ownership a number of times. You know, it was first sold to Sterling. You know, Simon Williams sold it to Sterling, and then it was acquired by CAA, and then finally by Broadcom. Now, each time it's done that, there's been a little bit of attrition in the Synon user base, and the available skills around the product itself is reducing as well, because we're getting less and less developers on the market, or they're actually retiring. And also the product itself really hasn't kept up to date with changes in the technology, not as much as what LANSA has and what you've seen so from what I've done with the demonstration. So really Synon is starting to hold organizations back. So the question would be, so why LANSA? Well, LANSA allows you to reuse your existing Synon and RPG systems. Yeah. So that investment that you've put into the system, it's not lost. You can still use it. And if it's still fit for purpose, you know, we have customers who've just externalized their programs, and they still use LANSA to call those external programs. But they've been able to then take advantage of the latest technologies. Yet to be able to design their applications and make their systems more agile, as you saw in the demo where I repurposed that 5250 screen. And slowly over time, you can then replace your sign-on programs using Visual LANSA at your own pace. So eventually you could completely rewrite everything and you will have no longer any dependencies on LANSA. Now, one of the main advantages that you'll find is that Synon and LANSA share the same heritage. They have similar concepts. So part of the Visual LANSA training is understanding that how to leverage our active repository. Well, Synon developers already understand this approach because of the data modeling aspect of the Synon tools. So they can more easily get to grips with the concepts of the LANSA repository and that centralized store, and it allows them to become productive sooner. Okay, I don't know whether that answered your question or not, but any other questions?
Yes, we have another question. So what's the relationship between SrinSoft and LANSA? And also those other tools demos earlier, how are they different or related to LANSA?
So Madden, would you like to respond to the question regarding SrinSoft?
Yeah, absolutely, Eugene. I mean, SrinSoft is predominantly a professional services company, and we have partnered with LANSA just to help on the professional services part of the equation. Again, like, the relation is just the partnership that we have between both the organization, LANSA being the product company. Any and every development that we're trying to do for LANSA, it is all going to be SrinSoft specifically around this area. I mean, that's on the relation between SrinSoft and LANSA. And Eugene, do you want to take over and answer? Probably like, what are the other tools demoed earlier? Like, how are they related to LANSA? Probably they are talking about the ramp and all those, softwares that you demoed right now.
Okay, so all of these, so Axes itself, so Axes is a standalone product. So you could install that on your IBM I and you can web enable your sign-on or RPG screen straight away. But what we've done with Visual LANSA is that we've been able to take advantage of the screens that have been refaced in Axes and get them working alongside modern web applications. And that's where the Visual LANSA frameworks and ramp actually comes in. So the Visual LANSA frameworks gives you that application accelerator, gives you the framework to which you can build your applications. Ramp, all that does is essentially plugs in the Axes screens and controls, think of it as a robot that controls the navigation through the system so that we only see the screens that we want to see. Now, I showed you in the demo where we just showed a destination as a data input screen, but a destination could easily be a menu system. Yep, so we don't have to what we call ramp every one of the screens in your system. We can do it in a staged sort of approach. So for that modernization journey, you may start with Axes, or you may just jump straight to repurposing them in the Visual LANSA frameworks. So Visual LANSA comes with Visual LANSA frameworks. Ramp is a plugin that allows you to use the Axes screens in a nutshell. Okay.
Sounds good. I think I guess we have time for another question. It's what are the pros of progressively migrating my sign-on workflows to LANSA?
Just repeat the question. Was that what are the pros of slowly migrating?
Yeah, migrating my sign-on workflows to LANSA.
It's really up to yourself on how you do it. It's less risk because you're taking it at your own pace. You can redevelop the functionality that needs to be redeveloped and leave the functionality which is working there. And I know some of the sign-on programs, so RPG programs you have, are going to be very complex. Now, these are the ones that you would use Axes to reface and plug into your web application, into VLF. Yep. So it's really, it's less risk. You take it at your own pace, and you redevelop the stuff that you need to redevelop first. But at the same time, you can add brand new functionality while you're doing that. So you get this very quick win where you're able to present a web application that leverages both new functionality and the old functionality. And then as time goes on, you can then replace it as and when you're required. And it can be just driven by the business at the speed you go. It's really up to yourselves.
Thank you, Eugene. So we have another question is, how big is LANSA client base? Can you name some of the prominent ones?
Okay, yeah, 8,000 customers worldwide. We have customers as big as Procter & Gamble, Mars, Nestle. In the UK, we have FMG, which is a insurance crash repair company. We have 8 of the top 10 banks in the city. So part of the LANSA community, we have ISVs who've developed solutions with our product, and those solutions are used across various industries. And one of those is a banking application. And as I mentioned, it's used in 8 of the top 10 banks in the city. So Lloyd's, Barcap, Citi, it's used across all of those. So there are quite a few large names that actually use LANSA.
Thank you, Eugene. I guess we completely ran out of time. So I would like to thank you for attending this webinar on how to modernize your sign-on applications with LANSA. And again, I would like to thank Eugene King, LANSA Senior Sales Engineer, and Madame Kumar, SrinSoft Senior Business Development Manager. I hope this webinar will inspire you to explore possibilities with LANSA and SrinSoft. In case you joined late, we will soon be sharing the recording of this webinar. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact LANSA at info@lansa.com, and also submit those questions to, well, we'll get in touch with SrinSoft as well. This concludes today's webinar.